Ancient 5,000-year-old book found in Egypt warns of human doom. To imagine unearthing a book older than the pyramids themselves is to imagine holding in your hands not just history, but the very breath of eternity. Its pages, fragile yet unbroken, whisper warnings of humanity's destruction across 5 millennia of silence. Recently, archaeologists claim to have uncovered such a manuscript in Egypt, a relic so ancient, so mysterious, that it unsettles the very foundations of what we thought we knew about history, prophecy, and the destiny of humankind. These words were etched into existence before Abraham wandered the desert, before Moses received the law, before even the myths of Greece and Rome were spoken into song. To read them is not merely to encounter text, but to confront the shadow of time itself staring back at us. And yet, within this relic lies not ritual alone, not poetry for the dead, but prophecy, a revelation of human doom so vivid, so haunting, that it feels less like the past and more like a mirror reflecting our troubled present. What does it mean when a voice from 5,000 years ago speaks to us with greater urgency than our leaders, sharper clarity than our philosophers, in a dread that matches our deepest modern fears? To take this discovery seriously is to walk directly into the storm of human destiny, with no illusions left to shield us. If this kind of revelation shakes you as it does me, then I invite you to subscribe, share your thoughts, and leave a comment below. Because history may be warning us, but it is in conversation with each other that we decide whether or not to listen. The forbidden text that should have stayed buried. When the manuscript was first pulled from the sand, wrapped in linen remnants and sealed in clay, cracked by centuries of shifting earth, those who first laid eyes upon it were struck not with triumph, but with dread. There is something profoundly unsettling about words that were not supposed to endure, words that feel as though they have defied time itself to reach us. One cannot help but ask, were they preserved by accident? Or did some ancient hand, knowing the weight of what they contained, bury them in a deliberate act of concealment? The book did not appear abandoned. It did not seem misplaced or forgotten, like the relics that often litter the archaeological record. No, it had been entombed, sealed with precision and secrecy, as though it were not a manuscript but a weapon, one too dangerous for open use. The air around it carried the unshakable impression that we were never meant to read it, never meant to hear the voice of whoever inscribed its warnings 5,000 years ago. Its fragile ink, faded but stubbornly legible, speaks of cycles rise and ruin, creation and collapse, the endless spiral of humanity's dance with catastrophe. It does not describe history as we like to tell it, as a story of progress and triumph, but as a circle, spinning endlessly between arrogance and disaster. Its words are painted in images that ignite the imagination. Serpents devouring the sun, oceans boiling as though set aflame, cities not conquered from without, but consumed from within, fire rising not as punishment from the heavens, but as the child of men's own hubris. At first, one might dismiss such images as myth, as allegory, as the kind of dramatic flourish all ancient cultures used to tell stories of gods and destinies. But a deeper reading unsettles this easy dismissal. The rhythm of the writing carries a peculiar precision, the weight of intention rather than mere ornament. It references numbers, cycles, and astronomical alignments with an accuracy that cannot be accidental. It is not simply poetry, it is calculation, knowledge disguised as myth, warnings coded in allegory. We see here not only imagination, but design. Not only the voice of a prophet, but perhaps the cold mind of an observer who studied patterns too vast for ordinary eyes. One cannot escape the suspicion that the ancients saw in the heavens and the earth truths we have forgotten, and that they wrapped those truths in symbols so that only the initiated could understand. Serpents swallowing the sun, could that not be an eclipse? Oceans boiling, could that not be the fever of a world burning under its own skies? Cities devoured by fire, could that not be civilizations undone by their own excess, their own inability to control the very forces they unleashed? Such imagery becomes less mythic and more mathematical when one reads it with the eyes of today. And so the question presses upon us with unbearable weight. Why did they hide it? Why would a civilization as proud, as enduring as Egypt, known for its obsession with permanence, its love of immortal stone, conceal a book of such significance? One theory, echoed by scholars, is that it threatened the foundations of power. A text that speaks of inevitable doom undermines kings and priests alike, destabilizes gods, and erodes the trust of people who live under the promise of eternal order. If the Pharaoh was divine, how could he admit to prophecies of ruin? If the temples claimed to hold the secrets of eternity, how could they tolerate a voice that declared all things temporary? Such a book would have been an act of treason against the very structure of Egyptian civilization. Better than to silence it, to bury it deep in earth and time, to hope that its voice would never again surface to trouble human minds. But there is another possibility, darker, more chilling, more intimate. What if the concealment was not to protect rulers, but to protect us, the future? What if the ancients, having read these words, understood their corrosive power, understood that once revealed, they would never be forgotten? That a prophecy of doom, once known, burns itself into the imagination like a scar, haunts every dream, bends every action, no matter how rational we believe ourselves to be. For knowledge of inevitable destruction changes us. It stains the soul. Perhaps the ancients feared not only despair but obsession, that we, in reading it, would begin to see ourselves only as actors in a script already written, rushing headlong toward an ending that cannot be avoided. If so, then their act of concealment was merciful, an attempt to shield us from truths we were not ready to bear. Yet mercy is rarely eternal. Clay cracks, linen decays, the earth shifts, and time, in its infinite patience, gives up its secrets. And now, after 5,000 years, the seal is broken. The voice is loosed upon the world again. We stand as unwilling heirs of a forbidden inheritance, holding in our hands a book that was never meant for us, that may yet undo us simply by being read. Like Pandora's jar once opened, such warnings cannot be unheard. The images, the numbers, the visions, they cling to us. They lodge in the recesses of thought, reshaping how we see our own time, our own choices, our own vulnerabilities. We cannot look at our burning forests, our melting ice, our endless wars, our invisible plagues, without hearing the whisper of those words. Serpents swallowing the sun, oceans boiling, cities devoured by fire. We cannot escape the sensation that what was once written as allegory now unfolds as fact. And perhaps that is the most frightening truth of all. That prophecy becomes real not because it foretells, but because it is remembered. Humanity, believing itself doomed, often fulfills its own fears. Thus, the manuscript confronts us with a paradox both terrible and beautiful. Its survival may doom us, yet its burial could never save us. Perhaps the ancients were wrong to hide it. Perhaps they underestimated the stubbornness of truth, the way it claws its way back to light, no matter how carefully buried. Or perhaps they understood that every civilization must, in its own time, face the mirror of its mortality. And perhaps now that time is ours. The forbidden text has returned, not as an artifact of the past, but as a message addressed directly to the present. Its words are not merely about them, the ancients, they are about us, the living. And whether we heed them or not may determine if humanity writes its own future or simply acts out the final page of a story already foretold. Prophecies of Doom, chilling predictions that mirror today. The book speaks in riddles, yet its riddles seem to echo the headlines we wake up to every morning, as if the voice of a civilization long dead still finds its way into the noise of our news cycle. It describes a world where the sky grows angry with heat and the breath of the earth chokes its children, a sentence written 5,000 years ago that reads like a report on climate change today. When forests blaze like funeral pyres, seas swallow coastlines, and drought spreads across fertile lands until nations collapse under the weight of thirst and hunger. It warns of brothers spilling blood and over the dust of the same soil until the rivers themselves turn red. And we cannot help but see in those words our endless wars, Ukraine, Gaza, tribal conflicts in forgotten corners of the earth, and political rivalries in our own nation that are no less bitter for lacking battlefields. Human beings killing one another for land, for oil, for ideology, For shadows of power that fade as quickly as the generations that claim them, was this not the pattern in the age of the pharaohs as it is today? The text speaks, too, of a sickness carried by invisible winds, a fever without cure that will strike rich and poor alike, silencing cities in a single season. What American, what human on this planet can read those words after the global pandemic and not feel the chill of recognition? We saw empty streets in New York and Los Angeles. We saw hospitals overwhelmed in Italy and India. We saw borders shut down not because of politics, but because of fear. And the text tells us it was always so, that pestilence and plague are not accidents of history, but inevitabilities of life itself. The most haunting power of this manuscript is not only that it speaks, but that it seems to speak now. Its metaphors, ancient as they are, point straight at our present crises with an accuracy that feels less like coincidence and more like destiny. Skeptics will argue that doom has always haunted the human imagination, that every generation believes itself to be the last, that prophecy is merely the projection of fear onto the canvas of eternity. And yet there is something uncanny in these words, something beyond the usual forebodings of mortality. For when the manuscript lists astronomical alignments, when it speaks of 1,000 generations and half before the black sun rises, scholars cannot dismiss it as mere poetry. They note that it eerily matches our epic, our century, our fragile present. Coincidence, perhaps, but coincidence so sharp it feels like the edge of a knife pressed against our collective throat. Could it be that the ancients, with their patient eyes fixed on the heavens and their ears tuned to the rhythms of earth, saw patterns we have forgotten? They measured the stars not with machines, but with devotion. They listened to the rivers not as resources, but as voices. They knew the soil not as property, but as mother and tomb. And in this intimacy with nature and cosmos, perhaps they recognized the inevitability of destruction, that civilizations burn themselves out like stars, that arrogance breeds catastrophe, that cycles of ruin are as natural as cycles of the moon. If they saw it, if they traced it with the quills of their age and buried it in clay for us to one day uncover, then the question becomes unbearable. If they saw it and ignored it, are we not doing the same? For what is our era but a repetition of their blindness, a reenactment of their hubris? We watch the skies grow hotter and call it economics. We watch wars multiply and call it politics. We watch sickness spread and call it chance. Yet the ancients in their riddles may have been more honest. They called it doom. And in doing so, they left us not merely a mirror of their fears, but a prophecy of our fate. Secrets the pharaohs didn't want us to know. What makes this discovery even more unsettling is the possibility whispered first by archaeologists, now echoing among historians and philosophers, that Egypt's rulers knew of this text and deliberately suppressed it. For the pharaohs were not only kings, they were gods in the eyes of their people, embodiments of eternity, who carved their names into stone so that time itself would bow to them. Their pyramids, their temples, their obelisks all proclaimed a single message: we are forever. But the existence of a book that declares otherwise, a manuscript that dares to say that time is not conquered, but a devourer, that humanity itself carries the seeds of its own undoing. Such a revelation would have been nothing less than heresy. To admit that even the mightiest throne is temporary, that empires vanish like smoke on the wind, that civilizations are no more durable than the clay jars they bury in the sand, this would have struck at the very heart of the pharaoh's power. For their divinity depended on permanence, on the illusion that they could outlast mortality. If a text proclaimed that permanence is a lie, that collapse is inevitable, then the pharaohs were not gods but merely actors on a fleeting stage. Could this be why the manuscript was buried, not copied into the grand libraries of Thebes, not inscribed upon temple walls but sealed away as though it were poison? Could it be that priests, fearing the spread of despair among the people, consigned it to darkness with the same solemnity one might use to bury a curse? Some passages seem to confess as well, speaking of those who drink power from silence, who shall erase the voices that speak of endings. In those words, we hear the echo of suppression, of censorship, of voices deliberately silenced so that the machinery of empire could keep turning without interruption. And yet, there is more to this book than despair. For hidden within its riddles are references not only to cycles of human folly, but to the great rhythms of the cosmos itself. It speaks of fire and flood, of cosmic realignments that erase civilizations as easily as a tide erases footprints in the sand. But it also speaks with a precision that shakes the modern mind, of eclipses, of planetary alignments, of vast cycles of time that span thousands of years, the very astronomical mechanics that our science now confirms with chilling accuracy. How could a civilization 5 millennia ago know of such things? How could they write of a return of darkness when the poles of heaven shift, if not from some profound awareness of celestial order? And here we confront the most unsettling possibility of all, that the ancients possessed knowledge we have long assumed was ours alone, that their intimacy with the heavens and the earth revealed to them truths we, with all our technology, are only rediscovering. We who pride ourselves on progress may be little more than children repeating lessons first whispered thousands of years ago. If so, then the text is not merely prophecy, it is science cloaked in myth, observation encoded in metaphor, the mathematics of nature disguised as visions of gods and beasts. The ancients may have understood that truth, stripped bare, could be too dangerous, too destabilizing, for a population that needed faith more than knowledge. And so they clothed it in allegory, and then, fearing even the allegory, buried it altogether. For to say openly that time would swallow them, that their monuments would one day be ruins, that their gods would be forgotten, this would have been to undo the Pharaoh's divinity with a single stroke of ink. And so silence became their weapon, concealment, their shield. They chose to bury truth in the desert rather than allow it to poison the illusion of permanence on which their rule depended. But if we read it now, if we expose its truths to the eyes of our own generation, we may be doing exactly what they feared. For we too live by illusions. We too build monuments, skyscrapers instead of pyramids, corporations instead of temples, technology instead of idols, but all proclaim the same message: we are forever. To admit that time will devour us, to acknowledge that humanity carries within itself the seeds of its doom, to confront the reality that our civilization may be no more durable than theirs. This is knowledge that does not simply inform, it destabilizes. And yet, unlike the pharaohs, we have no priest to bury it, no temples to silence it. The manuscript has risen, the seal is broken, and its voice now belongs to us. What we do with it, whether we dismiss it as myth, embrace it as prophecy, or study it as hidden science, will shape not only how we see the ancients, but how we see ourselves. For the greatest secret the pharaohs did not want us to know may not be about them at all, but about us, that no throne lasts forever, that no empire outlives time, and that humanity in its arrogance is always building pyramids in the sand. Are we living in this final warning? This is the question that lingers like a shadow over every page, the question that cannot be dismissed. However much we may want to look away, is the doom described in this book a distant echo, a warning for some imagined future? Or is it the very catastrophe unfolding in the age we call our own? The evidence gnaws at us like a whisper we cannot silence. Experts poring over the manuscript's strange numerical codes have pointed out that its timeline, its rhythm of reckoning, aligns not with some faraway millennium, but with this very century. The text does not drape itself in vague images alone. It speaks with arithmetic precision, foretelling a reckoning after 5,000 winters, when man shall stand at the edge of his own blade. 5,000 winters, that is us. We are that generation, the ones born into the moment the ancients calculated as the threshold of collapse, the inheritors of a warning written before our languages were born, before our faiths were formed, before our nations drew their borders in the sand. And what does it mean if the ancients saw our moment with such clarity? It can only mean one of two things. Either they glimpsed through myth the eternal pattern of humanity's self-destruction, or else they measured the great cycles of Earth and cosmos so accurately that their warning was less prophecy than inevitability. Perhaps it means that greed, violence, and blindness to nature are not modern failings, as we so often think, but ancient ones, embedded in the very marrow of our species, repeating like seasons. Perhaps the apocalypse is not a singular event, not an ending we can escape by surviving, but a cycle one that civilizations inevitably summon upon themselves as predictably as tides answer the moon. To read this text, then, is not to see ourselves as unique, chosen, or cursed, but to see ourselves as ordinary, as predictable, as destined to fall as surely as all who came before us. And yet the haunting question remains, the one that strikes like a spear through every careful explanation. If the book has survived, if its words have reached us at this precise moment of crisis, then is that mere coincidence or is it destiny? Is it possible that some ancient hand, aware of the weight of what had been written, buried this manuscript not simply to hide it, but to preserve it for us, the final readers, the ones who would need it most? If that is true, then we are not free spectators of prophecy, standing apart to analyze it in safety. No, we are its subjects. The countdown is not theoretical. It is already underway, and we are already inside its final pages. And so we stand in the paradox that defines human history. We are warned, yet we do not change. We are shown the mirror of doom, yet we dismiss it as myth, as exaggeration, as irrelevant to our busy modern lives. We cling to the illusion that our technologies, our wealth, our armies, our empires can outwit the laws of nature, that we can bend time itself to our ambition. But the ancients knew better. They saw that no wall can hold back time, no throne can bribe eternity, no mod carved in stone can silence the voice of decay. They knew what we still pretend not to know, that humanity is not above the earth, but within it, not the master of time, but its fleeting guest. The manuscript, then, does not speak with the voice of despair, but with the clarity of remembrance. It calls to us not as victims, but as participants, reminding us of what we have always forgotten, that to live as though we are eternal is the greatest lie, and to live as though we are temporary is the only truth that may save us. Perhaps then the true purpose of this manuscript is not prediction, but choice. Its words are not a script already written, but a mirror placed before us. It terrifies us into humility, shakes us awake before we stumble over the edge. It does not tell us that doom is inevitable, but that doom is what follows when arrogance blinds us, when power deceives us, when we forget that every empire is dust and every throne is clay. If so, then the question is no longer whether doom is coming. It is already here. The question is whether we will finally listen, whether we will look into this mirror of prophecy and admit that it shows not the end of the world, but the end of our illusions. And perhaps if we do, then for the first time in history, humanity might break the cycle the ancients so clearly saw. Perhaps we might learn in this late and trembling hour that the final warning was never a curse, but a gift.